Good morning, everyone. I think we're, if not live, about to go live imminently, so maybe we could all take our seats. Or last chance for coffee. I think there's still a few pieces of cheese and fruit up there, some warm water, some more caffeine for those of us who need it this morning. My name is Nat Hurley, and I'm the Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences. I want to acknowledge as we begin that I'm joining you online, those of us here in person, from the ancestral territories of the Beothuk, and I also acknowledge that the lands on which Memorial University's campuses are situated are in the traditional territories of diverse Indigenous groups. And I acknowledge with respect the histories and cultures of the Beothuk, the Mi'kmaq, the Innu, and the Inuit of this province. It's so great to be here this morning, and I would say a pretty respectable turnout for a Saturday 2 weeks before Christmas, when everybody probably has wrapping and shopping and all those sorts of things, but literature waits for no one. The Coastlines Book Club, which has brought us all here this morning, was born in 2020 and immediately established itself as a lifeline for book lovers, fostering a crucial sense of community for individuals often confined within their homes. So we emerged out of this during the global pandemic, and as the world grappled with unprecedented challenges, Coastlines provided audiences with an opportunity to feel connection and camaraderie while navigating a lot of isolation. So we should just say thank you to everybody who made this possible, who invented this. There's a group of people, some of them over here at the table, some of them who are elsewhere, thinking Janet Herron, who has already been invoked. And anyway, maybe we should just give everybody a quick hand. Since its inception, I've read numerous notes and received emails from individuals who stress that events like Coastlines help them to maintain a sense of normalcy and routine throughout the pandemic and diminish the kind of loneliness and even the aftermath of that loneliness that I think we all have experienced during the last few years. So it's really great to have events like this, and we're really delighted to make it happen at Memorial, through the press, through all of the various arms of Memorial that make this happen. It really does take a village. And I'm really happy to be joining you in person today. It's my privilege to welcome two remarkable authors, both proud Memorial alumni, whose books have already made enormous impacts on the literary world. Holly Hogan, a distinguished writer and wildlife biologist, has taken us on a journey through the vast oceans and brought forth a clarion call to protect our global waters in her book, Message in a Bottle. Her experiences, shaped in part by her time at Memorial, remind us of the profound connection between education and advocacy. Holly's book was also, no small feat, named a Governor General's Literary Award finalist for nonfiction. Pretty impressive, huh? As well you should be. I'm also delighted to welcome Shelly Kawaja, whose Winterset Award-winning debut novel, The Raw Light of Morning, explores the resilience and strength of women and children in the aftermath of significant trauma. Also, no small feat. Let us give them both a hand. We are so lucky to live in such a vibrant writing culture where people are doing this work. I mean, how lucky are we just to be here today? Now, before turning things over to our other alumnus and current Memorial PhD candidate, Angela Antle, I would just like to express my gratitude to everybody here today, as well as those of you joining online. By featuring works from our alumni and faculty, Coastlines underscores the importance of nurturing and supporting the literary endeavors of all those who pass through our university. As we delve into these authors' captivating narratives, we not only celebrate the achievements of talented writers, but also recognize the vital role that the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences and the arts in general play in Newfoundland culture and in shaping the intellectual and creative landscape of this province. So, I say let us cherish the connections forged through the written word, and may events like Coastlines Book Club continue to be the kinds of inspiration, the gathering point, and a place for open and honest exchange within our community, because this is how we make community, by coming together like this. So thank you very much for coming. I'm going to turn things over to Angela and to the writers. Enjoy the next discussion.
I have a mic. Yes, thanks, Dr. Hurley. Come on up, girls. I'm going to sit in the middle. So that was a lovely welcome from Dr. Hurley, and I'm really thrilled to be here as the host with two incredible women who I'm lucky to call friends, and I've just reread their books because I read them when they first came out, and then reread them again for today's event. What can I say about Holly's message in a bottle? I'm going to start with that. Holly is a writer, as you know, and a wildlife biologist. She received her undergraduate and graduate degrees from Memorial University. This is a book, as Shelly was talking about at the table, full of really grody adventure. With Holly crawling through guano and jumping off of things and being charged by giant seals and seeing penguins flicked around with blood flying everywhere as, you know, the sort of circle of life happens in Antarctica. If you've ever had a fantasy of being a seabird biologist, read this and you'll want to quit your job and do what Holly does, which is incredible. I also think this book is, we're in the week of COP28. I've been personally watching and trying to follow the events there. And there's so much to learn to understand the disinformation and the information and what's happening really with our environment. And if you read this book, it's really a great primer to understand what is happening, especially in the Atlantic. So get the book, you'll understand a lot more about what's happening in the world. So just to go through Holly's bio, her work has taken her to the Arctic and Antarctic oceans and every latitude in between. She's been interviewed on CBC Radio, appears in the National Film Board series Ocean School. She's provided expertise on seabirds and the impact of marine plastic for the award-winning doc Come Hell or Clean Water. She's a mom of 3, lives in St. John's with her husband, Michael Crummy. You might have heard of him. And there's an assortment of cats and dogs there as well. And her book, Message in a Bottle, just shortlisted for the top Globe 100 Books of the Year. Congratulations, as well as the Governor General's Award. So I hope you're going to read a grody part of your book.
Yes.
Yes. Something really gritty and
With something that is really unnerving to me. So,
okay.
As far as the scale goes.
Okay,
yeah.
good. Do you want a book to read from?
Oh, I have one.
You
actually.
have one. Excellent. I didn't see that, so I thought, well, how is she going to do a reading?
Should I
go for it?
Go for it. Okay. Is there a slideshow that goes with this?
Something happens.
Okay, because I'll just do a little intro first. So there's a lot about ocean currents in the book because ocean currents are really important to the way nutrients and oxygen and plastic get circulated around the globe. But I'm going to read to you from a section when I was 24 years old, which was at least 10 years ago. Many, many years ago. And I didn't understand anything about ocean currents at the time. I was just an undergrad looking for an adventure and working in seabirds. So I was offered a position working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on this island in the Gulf of Alaska called Middleton Island. And I just figured, well, it's Alaska. It's got to be like Arctic and snow-peaked mountains. And I was also going to be working on a species called the black-legged kittiwake, which we have in Newfoundland. And it nests on steep cliffs. So I thought it was going to be very dramatic scenery. And but I didn't ask any of those questions. They were all just assumptions. And there was no Google 10 years ago or so. And so I just went blindly. And so when we were flying over this island, I looked out the window of this small plane and it was just flat. And it was early May in Alaska, so it was like hay colored. It was a sandbar covered in grass and a couple of derelict buildings and this odd shipwreck at one end of the island. And I was just looking at it going, this place is a dud. And also, where are the kittiwakes? Like, there's no kittiwake habitat here. So it ended up that this shipwreck was part of the bird colony, and that's what I'm going to read to you about today. The ship was called the SS Coldbrook. Okay, so here we go. We entered the Coldbrook through a gaping hole on the port side and climbed a ladder from the hull to the first deck, 9 meters above. The inside of the ship felt like the set of a horror movie, the oppressive darkness flecked with pinpricks of light through the lacy rust holes. The cold and dampness from decades of rainwater and moist salt air seeping to the marrow. Hard hats were our protection against the tons of concrete that were collapsing on disintegrating metal support beams. Using headlamps, Using headlamps, we walked slowly and carefully along crumbling floors that could and did give out underfoot. A cold draft came from everywhere and nowhere, rising from the torn hull, the holes in the rusted floor, the walls, winding down halls from open portholes, surrounding your body like a cold whisper, lifting the fine hairs on your legs, your arms, the back of your neck. Silence echoed in the hollow center of the ship, occasionally pierced by the sudden scream of a kittiwake, a jolt of electricity to the heart. Near our observation room, we had to pass a meat locker where the mummified corpse of a cow still hung motionless. If you looked the wrong way, it would flash past your singular beam of light, the image burned on your retina. Shipwrecks, I understood, involved much death and drowning. Where were the other bodies? Every time I entered the ship, I was leaden with dread. Carefully and slowly, we picked our way along hallways, half submersed in stagnant rainwater and lined on each side with cabins. What was intensely unpleasant for us, though, was the very definition of puffin luxury. Tufted puffins were now the occupants of the crew's accommodation. Normally, puffins nest in deep burrows, long chambers in the cold earth that they have to excavate themselves. But here, the work had been done for them. Each dresser drawer was occupied by a puffin pair, a small nest built inside. The hallways saw regular traffic as birds entered and left their burrows in pursuit of food and daylight, paddling carefree to and fro. The island turned out to be full of strange surprises and hidden treasures. I spent a lot of time combing the beaches. The sand spits and tidal flats that appeared relatively barren from the air were alive with animals that were completely exotic to us. Stellar sea lions loafing on the beach and in the water, swimming parallel to us, spying as we walked. Northern phalaropes spinning in circles, stirring up tiny crustaceans to eat from the bottom of tidal pools. The nonstop chatter of oyster catchers, their pale pink legs clashing with bright red bills. Flocks of migrating shorebirds and waterfowl. As early spring progressed into summer, activity blossomed. One of the most intriguing things about the beach was the flotsam that washed up on its shores. Impossibly delicate blown glass balls used for floating nets, hard hats, an array of random debris inscribed with Asian characters. Nothing like the shotgun shells and beef buckets I was accustomed to seeing in Newfoundland. I couldn't fathom how these objects found their way to a remote island in the Gulf of Alaska. At 24, I was content to leave it a mystery. Hold on there. I said this reading was 5 minutes, only 4.5, so now we've just made up the extra half minute. The puzzling presence of those glass globes and hard hats on the beach stuck with me. It was decades before I'd even heard of the Japan Current or the Great Pacific Garbage Patch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There wasn't enough blood and gore in that.
Sorry. I will tell you that my author photo, since you already mentioned penguins being turned inside out. This picture, I didn't know it was being taken, but it was in Antarctica off of Elephant Island, which is where Shackleton's men were stranded for a long time. There was a leopard seal hunting chinstrap penguins, and I was trying to get out of the way so the people in the Zodiac could see. So I was like this with my leg up. And I said, I'm looking altogether too relaxed for an employee, aren't I? And then I burst out laughing. So that's what's going on in the background of this picture, is a penguin being turned inside out by a leopard seal.
Okay, that's good. Then you've made up for it now.
Okay.
All right, Shelly, we're going to put you on the hot seat now. So Shelly Kawaja won the 2022 BMO Winterset Award for her debut novel, The Raw Light of Morning. Her work can also be found in Riddle Fence, Horseshoe Literary Magazine, the Humber Literary Review, and the Dalhousie Review. She was longlisted for the Bridge Prize, the Fresh Fish Award, and won the Grit Lit 2020 Short Fiction Contest. She's the nonfiction reviews editor at the Artisanal Writer and a graduate of UBC's MFA program, the Humber School of Writers, Memorial University, and she teaches creative writing at Grenfell and lives in Corner Brook with her family. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
So you're going to read while we
I can,
look at slides from your book?
And I just want to say the slides that are going to come up behind me, I mean, when I got invited to do this, I got an email from Janet. And I said, yes, I'd love to. Thank you for having me. And then I got another email with a very long list of to-dos. and one of the things was to send pictures for the slideshow as I read. And I'm like, well, it's a fictional book. How do I come up with pictures? So I actually reached out to an artist I know, Jean Germani. And so it is her artwork that I'm going to show. And it's very dark and romantic and rural and rugged and ephemeral, and I just feel like that's how I feel about writing, so I just thought it was a good, a fitting match. Laurel's room was freezing, but she stripped off her clothes and crawled into bed underneath the bearskin. The skin crinkled whenever it moved, bits of tissue dried hard. She caught the scent of it, just there. Wind at the cusp of winter. It swept across the bog through dense, skinny spruce trees. It blew past the farm and the crabapples and the goats in the pasture along the West River. The curtains billowed out across her room, then settled back against the brick walls. Goosebumps raised on her arms as she ran her hands through the bear's fur, searching in the dark. Her fingers snagged the ragged edge of the bullet hole. She slid a finger into it, another. Her mother had killed that bear when her dad was away in Labrador. Laurel had been outside one morning, playing with her little brother, Bud, in the snow. Her mother yelled at them to get in the house. She never yelled at them, not like that, not urgent and terrified. But Laurel wasn't strong enough to carry Bud. Her mitts had slipped on his snowsuit when she ran, and she dropped him on his face in the snow. Her mother picked him up by the back of his suit, one-handed, and ran as he wailed. Her other hand, at the back of Laurel's neck, pushed, forced her to move. Her knees burned, cracking the surface. Laurel hadn't known why her mom was so mad. She thought it was because she'd dropped her brother, until she heard her on the phone with Uncle Roll. "There's a bear," she'd said. "Its tracks are all over the garbage bin." Laurel listened from the carpet. Whatever Uncle Roll said upset her mom, and she screeched into the phone that it wasn't a dog, slammed the receiver down. She slammed it down over and over until Bud started to cry. Then she ran over and scooped him up. "But Mom," Laurel said, "it's winter." She'd been playing on top of the garbage bin and hadn't seen any tracks. "It's not impossible for a bear to wake up, goddammit." Her mother lifted Bud from the floor, pressed him to her chest. "I'm sorry," she said. "It's rare, but it happens. And a winter bear is hungry. Sometimes it's a little mad." They spent days boarded up in the house. Her mother would go out onto the veranda and bang a spoon against a metal pot, then scour the yard for tracks, while Laurel watched with her face pressed to the window. "I think it's gone," her mother said, after what had felt like an endless amount of time stuck indoors. She unlocked the hunting rifle from the gun case, then stood on the top step and fired a warning shot into the air. Finally, she ushered Laurel and Bud, bundled in snowsuits, outside to play. Laurel breathed in so fast her nostrils stuck together. Her mother shoveled little walking paths for Bud, and Laurel dug a cave into a pile of snow. It was hard work to make a snow fort. She needed a shovel or a bucket to dig it deep enough to sit inside. There was always something like that lying around the garbage bin. Laurel made her way over to the old deep freeze and spotted a stick spearing up from the snow, the same stick they used to prop open the lid. Laurel hunched down and worked it back and forth, the snow crunching as she tried to tug it free. Her mother's shout sounded like a crow, ragged, piercing. "Don't move, Laurel, don't move. You hear me?" Her voice rose to an impossible octave. She shoved through the snow with the rifle in her hand. The gun swung in wild arcs. She wasn't carrying it properly, not the way Laurel's father had shown them. There were all sorts of gun rules. The rifle was always locked in the case. It was only for shooting practice and hunting. You could never touch it unsupervised. You always had to move it slow, with purpose. You never ever pointed it at a person. Something huffed on the other side of the bin, a deep, guttural breath. The bin shook. A growl sent a cold shot of fear into Laurel's gut, and she froze. Her mother crunched to a stop in front of her and raised the rifle, legs spread wide, shoulders braced. Laurel had never seen her look so tall, so strong. She cocked the lever and locked it into place, leaned her shoulder into the gun. The garbage bin bumped Laurel's back. The bear snuffed and snarled. Laurel couldn't breathe. Her mother's face had a sheen like ice when it starts to melt. Her eyes narrowed. The freezer rocked. Thump, thump. Her mother's lips pressed together. She pushed out a breath that rolled and coiled along the barrel. The brown of her eyes turned almost black. She fired.
Beautiful. Thank you. That was fantastic. In rereading these books, I was looking for common ground, which is ridiculous, but I thought there is common ground here. There's kinship with animals for sure, and animals represent, I think, hope in both cases. So I'll start with you, Shelly. What do the animals? What's the metaphor of
Well,
the
I think
bear?
Laurel might be a dove key, actually, because the dove key in that book stood out to me. It's just this tiny little bird in these really harsh conditions, and that's where they thrive, right? And I even mentioned like the Brea flower in this book, and that's a nod to that, how your environment informs who you become and who you are in so many ways. And when you grow up in a rural area, and if you grow up in a harsh area, it doesn't necessarily make you a harsh person, but it does make you strong, right? Like you do learn some survival skills and techniques. So I thought there was some connection there. And I see a big connection too in just trauma that you see in the land and in the environment, and the trauma we experience personally. I think they're just so connected in so many ways, and I don't even think that's been explored as much as I would like to see it explored in literature and in writing. But yeah, I think there's a lot of connection there for sure.
Yeah. Okay, and I don't think my mic is on anymore. Oh, there it is. I was going to save this for later, but because we're talking about the natural world and connections, I noticed that the three siblings are all named after plants.
Yeah.
And I don't, even Bud, there aren't too many boy names, but Bud. And so I was wondering, I know what it conjured for me, but I was wondering what it meant to you. Or
Well, I don't know. Their names changed so many times, but they were always something related to the natural world. And Bud was the one I struggled with the most, actually, because nothing really stuck. And then Bud was a bit of a placeholder, and I'm like, no, that's his name. That's it. He's Bud. And then there's Horsey as well, the friend, and it really was a nod to just that environmental landscape and how much it informs who you are and how it sticks with you. And I kept thinking too about the mother, and she was a little outside of that. Her name's Maxine. And her mother is Iris, again a plant. So her name kind of marks her as a bit of the outsider, but she passed it on to her kids. So I kept trying to think of what would the mother name them, and I just came up with, these names from the natural world. But really, that's what it was just a nod to not just the natural environment, but I think what it means in terms of home, like that's where they came from, and in the end of the book, that's where they land back. And I just felt like that going full circle was necessary to move on.
Right.
So yeah, the names were a little nod to that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also, if I may,
please, please,
piled onto that, just thinking, especially of Bud, and like Laurel, is another beautiful flower, and Brea, Long's Brea, which is one of the children, is named after this rare, beautiful plant, and it all just seemed like these were new lives with new potential, and were blossoming.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not to give anything away.
And in your book, Holly, you talk about the charismatic species of certain whales. The albatross is obviously a charismatic species. Those are easier stories to tell, right? Because we, for some reason, as humans, can relate to these or want to follow these species.
Yeah.
We want them to survive.
That's right, and so those are the species that we know about and that we care about, like the endangered North Atlantic right whale, which the federal government is. Well, we're all very much aware of the issue and how perilous their circumstances are now. But these big whales, we really do care about, and so but they live in the ocean that all the other less sexy creatures live in. So protecting those whales protects a lot of other things as well. And also like the dovekie, probably nobody in this room has ever heard of a dovekie except Michael, who has no choice. But it's the laurel in the book. I really love when I work on expedition ships. Bringing people's attention to these feisty little creatures that are out there, like braving the North Atlantic and choosing northern Greenland as a place to breed. It's like they've, they would probably be Buddhist monks if they were people. They're just, picking the harshest environments, and they're so small and tough. And
The other common ground that I found in both books, I think, is that you're both wrangling very eloquently with rage, with female rage around the environment in your case, and how people who grow up in poverty are labeled and how restricted they are, or things are imposed on them.
The system, yeah, absolutely.
So did you feel at some point were you sort of like, I can't go too far here, I can't let people know how angry I am?
Yeah, actually that took work, and draft by draft you can see that softening up. Like, so the first draft was a lot angrier, but I think that's normal. You almost need that energy maybe to get through a first draft sometimes, and then you work through it and you soften it, because just it's not pleasurable to read, and raging in someone's face is never really effective. But it came down to, I think, I call it my draft of shame. It was one of the last drafts I wrote that I submitted to my supervisor, because I wrote the last few drafts of this book as for my thesis at UBC. So my supervisor read it and sent it back, and several times up to this point, he had hinted at, read through with an eye for judgment. You know, just any whiff of judgment, you know, you need to work out that wrinkle, right? Like read through, and I was like, yeah, sure, like I've done that. There's no judgment in here. Like, I got this covered. So I wasn't seeing it at this point. I thought I had done what I needed to do, but I really think it's impossible to write a book completely by yourself because you don't always see the things you don't want to see. And so my draft of shame was the very final one when he said, I got to point out a few things. And there was like a few spots, and when I went back and looked, and he had just pointed out like one or two, and then from there I saw more. And you literally see your judgment, like you cannot, like you see it. It's quite visceral, it's almost ghoulish. And I was like, oh yeah, no, that's me raging in a corner right there. Like I'm in this scene and I am raging in a corner. And you just kind of have to wipe that away because it does cloud the story, you know? So yeah, there was definitely an element of working out the rage. But the rage is real, it's there, and I think it's still in the book, but it's less my judgment of it or my...
Yeah, well said.
Yes,
Yeah.
so it's more for the reader to read and form their own rage.
Yeah. Yeah. And how about you in terms of the environment? You don't want
Yeah.
people to feel so angry and so overwhelmed that they can't
Yeah.
do anything or they feel powerless.
Right. And I was really careful and sincere in my effort to not be judgmental about. I mean, I'm very judgmental about industry and government because you know we've been
They want to
fed.
protect the status quo.
They want to protect
Yeah.
the status quo, and they want to make us buy their things. And but as you know, I keep saying it's become my mantra is you need to be informed to make informed decisions. And you know, everything that I'm writing about and the changes that I want to help people make in their own lives once they're informed are the same things that I like. You know, 5 years ago, or maybe more than that now, but you know, I was accumulating mountains of plastic trash and washing it all and putting it in recycling and thinking it disappears and that's the end of that and I've done my job and it wasn't until I went into the deep research that I realized what plastic is doing to our own bodies, to the ocean, and so I really don't want people to feel judged, and I really was careful about that the whole time because I don't feel judgmental about people. But it's funny, Lisa Moore, a good friend of mine, she said, you need to write another book, and it needs to be about oil. And I said, and I'm bringing this up because you talk about rage, and it was easy for me to feel nurturing toward everybody in the book on plastics because that was me. You know, I could clearly relate to it. But writing a book about oil, I just think, oh no, I'm way too enraged about that. I said, no, it will. If I wrote that tomorrow, it'd be all piss and vinegar, and I don't want to write that book right now. But yeah, I think it's really important to tell the story, whatever it is, and but tell it in a way that where there is compassion and room.
And you both do that very well. I would have been far more ragey.
Draft one.
Draft one, yeah. I wanted to ask Holly while we're talking, your book started as a presentation, right, for very rich people on a northern or Antarctic cruise.
Yes.
A presentation on plastic in the oceans. What was their reaction to that first presentation, and why did you think this could be a book?
Oh, well, I did prepare this talk on marine plastics specifically for Antarctica because I was struggling in my mind about even going to Antarctica. Like, you know, should I be here?
Right.
Should anybody be here? And I thought, you know, and that's another whole story. But I thought, well, if I'm going to go, I want to give a presentation that has impact. Because on these expedition ships, they're small ships, and it's very expensive to take these trips, especially to Antarctica. And there are experts on board, you know, talking about history, geology, marine ecology, whatever. I was a seabird person, And, but I developed a talk on marine plastics because everybody shows up to all of the talks. It's a captive audience. Where are you going to go? You might as well just sit there and listen to me. Because I thought, well, I'm going to bring this to, bring the issue alive to these people who run companies and are big investors in oil and gas, and because plastic is a petroleum product, in case you didn't know.
Plastic is oil. Yeah.
Plastic is oil, yeah. And so, and so it was, I gave talks with great penguin pictures and all kinds of other sort of Antarctic fun stuff and interesting stuff. But the plastics talk was one that conversations went on for days in relation to. It got people thinking and questioning, and so that was really great. But actually, that's the reason it became a book is because when I got back from Antarctica, I just posted on Facebook, I have this talk on marine plastics. If anybody wants me to give it to a school group or a community group or anything at all. Didn't hear from anyone, except the editor of Literary Review of Canada. And he said, would you send that to us? I think our board might be interested in having you develop an article for it. And so I did, and I wrote an article for the Literary Review of Canada. And then the real sort of air in the tires was Margaret Atwood tweeted it. So then it caught everyone's attention, and I was offered a book deal that way.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, so that's how that happened.
Thank you, Maggie.
Yeah. Kudos. Yeah.
Shelly, I was reading a review of your book from Atlantic Books today, and it was parsed as crime fiction, and I thought, I'm not sure about that.
I know, yeah.
How do you feel
that
about
was
that?
Interesting conversation. She called me, actually, and said she was writing a piece on crime fiction, and she wanted to include my book, and my first thought was like, well, why? It's a crime fiction. But we had a good conversation, and I think it could be read that way somehow. There is crime in the book, and I don't mean like the shooting. I don't think that really was a crime. But just things sometimes you have to do when you're in poverty. I think you're constantly sometimes pulled in that direction. I think crime is around you, like it's a part of your life. There's scenes where the kids are, smoking dope in the basement, or, there's someone stealing, or, it's just, I think those desperate situations make crime easy, and almost normalized, I think. So I don't know if I would call my book a crime fiction, but there's elements in there, yeah.
Crime, yeah. Holly, we were having a great conversation at the table before with Michael, your partner, your husband, about he was so happy for you when you got the book deal. However, there was a certain reticence because he knew he was going to have to live with you while you wrote the book and see you struggle through that. So what was the experience like?
It was really rough. I mean, it was my first book.
This is a woman who's fought off leopard seals.
Yeah, give me a leopard seal any day over trying to write a book. Those are the real brave people, the ones that write a second book. So the book that I was asked to write was one of memoir / travel adventure / marine plastic. And I thought, wow.
Easy.
Yeah, sure. And so I had no idea what that was going to look like. But I thought, well, I'll start with the easy stuff, my stories. So I wrote a bunch of that, and then I did some research on marine plastics, and I sent off this thing. I won't call it a draft of a book. I'm not sure what I would call it, but I sent it to my editor, and she said, "This is the way you've written it. The memoir leads and the plastic follows. I would like to see a book where the currents lead and the plastic follows, or something like that." And that's, I think, when Michael saw the first tears, maybe. Michael! Because I thought, that sounds beautiful. But what the hell does it mean? Like, what does that mean? How do you do that? Anyway, so Amanda Betts is my editor, and you know, she helped me weave all of that together. And Michael was a huge help all along the way, not just emotional, psychological support, but also honesty in usually the kindest of ways. There were tears, there was gnashing of teeth, but he was incredibly helpful and supportive, and, you know, handed me the tissues.
How many drafts did you go through?
I would say at least 5. Yeah. If I count that first one as a draft, because I didn't really know how to put these things together. Maybe 5 is, yeah, but you know, as the actual shape probably happened on the 3rd draft, and then there were things that just needed, you know, massaging and extra writing for.
I have to share a little bit of writing from your book, because you are a beautiful writer.
Oh,
Really,
thank you.
I was really struck not only by the gore, I do like the gore, but the beautiful writing struck me over and over again. Here's a little sample that I wanted to share. Gary slowed the boat and the engine quieted to a gentle putt-putt. From the dark cliff face, the barely there high-pitched notes of the black guillemots, emerging and disappearing into the shadows of the rock face, the whirring wing beat, the strobing flash of white on the wing, almost hallucinatory, if not for the solitary birds strung out in a line along the contour of a narrow crevice like knots in a rope, proving their existence. Just beautiful.
Thank you, Angela.
Did you keep a diary on all these trips? Like, how did you come to source that stuff?
I didn't keep a diary, but I mean, but a lot of it was work related, so I could remember, you know, I drew maps, and so this was the really fun part for me, was being in the boat and describing what I saw, and I learned a lesson early on that, and I think it's from reading so many great writers. You know, you start to absorb methods without even really realizing it. But I was writing in the very, very early stages, and this was a terrestrial thing. It didn't make it into the book. It was one of the, but from my editor. But I was trying to describe looking at a bird's nest. I was working on songbirds. And so I started to describe, you know, I had my scope and I was doing this and that. And I thought, that's really boring, because the image that I was creating was of me looking through a telescope. And I thought, who cares, right? That's not interesting to imagine. But then, so then I realized it's what I'm seeing, how I'm experiencing the thing that I'm looking at. So I described in much more detail, like, the bobbing heads of these little, I was looking in the nest of these little flycatchers. They're tiny little birds. And these 2 parents were working their butts off, bringing back little caterpillars, and there were these little heads that looked like they reminded me of poppies on these long stems, their heads just bobbing around with the gaping mouths. And that's way more interesting, you know.
Yeah.
So that's what I tried to help the reader see through my eyes, like, to share the experiences, and hopefully to, you know, make the reader feel invested as I am in what's at stake.
Yeah. There's a lot of tenderness in how you write about those birds. Yeah. And Shelly, there is a lot of tenderness in your book as well, mixed with complete fearlessness. Which, whenever I read your work, and I've been lucky enough to read some of the early drafts of your work, you're just fearless. I don't understand how you can be like that.
I don't know. I don't think I'm like it in real life. It's really strange, actually. I feel like there's this writer self that's completely cleaved off from, you know, my regular, like, mom self. Yeah, it's really strange. But I think over past year, I've actually gotten better maybe at reconciling those two parts. And I don't really know how to explain that, but just feeling a little more comfortable talking about writing, I think, and sharing it. And it feels so personal. Maybe that's partly where the fearlessness comes from, because I really do try to get in this space, like it's this protected space, and you don't think about anyone else when you're there. You don't think about what anyone else might think of your work or what you have to say or your writing or how you're writing it. So you feel so freed up, you know, and I don't know if in the writing of it, it doesn't feel fearless. I think it just feels free, you know, like you don't question. And kind of my motto, and I've been teaching creative writing this semester, and my motto to the students, and they've heard me say it several times, is think less, write more. You know, just write what's there, and let it sit. Like, write what's in your mind without questioning it, and let it sit, and then give it some time to rest, and then come back and listen to what it's telling you. You know, like, so it becomes this weird kind of conversation between your writing and yourself, and then you build on it, and you keep building on it. But yeah, a lot of it is about just protecting that really strange, solitary writer space. Yeah.
Which is no mean feat with two youngsters.
No, it is. This is true. And that's where the weirdest bit comes through, because then you're with your kids and you put on this happy mom face and you go to the sports games and you're saying all the right things, and then you go home and you write this book and you're like, this person's gonna die.
Maybe it's therapy.
Yeah, it's definitely strange.
I want to recognize, you know, the awards you've both been recognized with your first books. It's an amazing thing. How does it help? Does it hinder?
Oh, yeah, that's such a big question. It helps, yes. It helps because it validates, and you'd like to think you don't need that, but when you get it, you're like, oh, I needed that so bad. And it helps to know people are reading, and they want to hear what you have to say. And even if someone has something negative to say about it, even that, you're just like, yeah, but you read my book, you know? Like, it's really, really amazing. But it hinders you too, because it creates noise, you know? And then you have this noise that tries to get into that space where you write so freely. So it does make it harder. It almost makes your space a little tighter. But that softens up too after some time. Like, you know, in this past year, I think I've gotten more comfortable with that as well. But I read something somewhere, and I can't remember where I read it, but it's an article I read related to teaching writing, and it was something about how praise can be just as toxic as criticism, because both can influence you and both can get to you, and one can make you a narcissist and one can make you depressed. So it's like, no matter what feedback you're getting, it doesn't matter. You always need to, you know, you go there, you see it, you acknowledge it, and then you really need to push it back out of your way and go back into your quiet little room and write again.
Do you have any magic authors that you go back to? Any sort of, you know, things that you perform, jewelry that you wear? Like, what is the magic that keeps you going when you're stuck?
Oh, that's funny. There are some magic authors. Lucia Berlin is one I love, and she writes a lot of short stories, and which are nice and quick and easy reads. And so I'll pick her up sometimes and just read a story to get in the mood. And she's someone who says writing for her is very personal, and that's how writing feels for me. So I really appreciate where she comes from as a writer. So I'll often pick up her book and read that.
What do you mean when you say writing is personal?
That's a good question. It's personal in that it's partly about you. I mean, you're writing fiction, but you're in it, and for me, I don't shy away from that. It becomes a part of it. And I've been reading a lot lately. I mean, I could talk about this for hours, so feel free to cut me off. But I've been reading a lot of memoirs lately that play with fiction and truth. I really enjoy that. And I've read one book recently called, what is it called?
There's a kind of frisson there between truth and
Like they're
fiction,
both
right?
there.
There's a
Well,
kind of
Michelle Porter is a
danger
good
zone.
example. And that's one of the books I've chosen, Michelle Porter's Scratching River is a good example. It's like memoir, but there's also fiction, and they're weaved together to get at a truth that you wouldn't be able to get at solely with one or the other.
Right.
And instead of hiding it or muddying it up, it's very much admitted, like, this is the memoir, this is the fiction, and I'm gonna do this. And I've just become really fascinated with that. And I can't remember what you asked me originally, or why I'm talking about this.
what your magic process is to stay.
Yeah. So it's definitely a
In the
process
zone.
of going very internal. I definitely write from an internal place rather than external, and I think that makes it very personal as well. So most of my inspiration is internal inspiration.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And what about you? Do you sprinkle, bird skeletons around in a circle and do a dance? Or
No, but I do find that time at sea, it's not only inspiring in terms of reminding me of why I love this and why it's so important to me, but I was just saying a little while ago that it's very meditative, because sometimes you're seeing a lot, but there's a lot of times when you're not seeing very much. So there's enough focus so that you aren't falling asleep, but your mind is free to wander as well. And a lot of creative thoughts have come to me while doing seabird surveys, and I wouldn't mind actually addressing your first question about what praise the book has gotten and how that feels, because of course for first book it's validating. As soon as the numbers of sales goes over 20, you go, okay, that's my whole family. Now there's people that don't know me that are reading the book. But honestly, like, I was driven to write the book because I really want people to understand what's happening to the ocean and what happens to the things that leave your hands and what they're doing to the planet. I think most people have no idea, and they would care if they did understand that. So when it was shortlisted for the GG, and when it makes these lists, and I've been posting I feel really terrible about all this personal button pushing, like, whoa, look at this, people. But it's not about me at all. The more people that read the book, so like this presentation that I gave, and someone asked me if I would give it to them. I said, yes, it has all my notes. I don't feel proprietorial about it either. It's like, my MO is to get people informed and caring. So that's what it does for me.
and we didn't bring this up, but you have found and seen plastic in like everywhere that you have gone. Like, you think of Antarctica as this pristine place where there's no, impact from man, but you've seen.
And I have
everywhere.
contributed to it myself. And I didn't write this in the book mostly because I thought the company that hired me might come wring my neck. But I was on top of a penguin colony, and it was blustery. It was really windy, and snow flying everywhere. It was just awful. And I had to take off my glove to reach something, and it was a rubber glove, and it went flying. And I thought, oh my God, and I chased my glove. But as I was going, I was making holes in the snow, and you can't do that, or you have to fill in the holes because penguins can fall in these boot holes and then they're stranded. So I'm just going, oh my God, what's worse, these holes that I'm going to have to fill in, and I'm leaving, the place unattended for when people come up, or letting and it wasn't really an option because, the wind took it. And I was like, well, I know people shouldn't be here. I certainly shouldn't be here. There's one more piece of plastic on this pristine continent now, thanks to me. So I kind of got off track. What were we saying? Oh yeah, I've seen plastic everywhere. Like there's this island called South Georgia, which is 18,000 kilometers east of it's pretty much smack dab between the southern tip of Africa and South America, and it gets caught in this incredibly nutrient-rich Antarctic convergence current. So it's really rich, and it's just burgeoning with life. And last trip that I was there, I saw a fur seal with fishing line wrapped around its neck. And it happens, you see that on a regular basis. So this stuff just gets carried by the currents, and you can protect an area, but it's really hard to protect the ocean unless you're doing it on a wholesale kind of level. Yeah.
I think it's a great time to ask for your book recommendations. So I'll start with you, Holly.
Okay.
You have your list there
I
of
do
your
have my
5 local
list.
authors who you'd like to give some love to.
Yes. I mean, actually generating the list was easy. It was like, oh, there's so many great local writers and local books. And then I realized I haven't, if I didn't read it yesterday, I have forgotten most of the details. So one of the first ones that came to my mind was Come Thou Tortoise by Jessica Grant, which is an incredible book. And because I was asked to generate this list, and because I have such a poor memory, I'm rereading it now, and I'm just loving it. It's like a brand new book. But I mean,
the
it's
benefits
just
of aging.
Yes, exactly. One of the benefits of aging. It's the only benefit. No, but Come Thou Tortoise. It's so beautiful, and it's about love and eccentricity and acceptance, and it's funny. I just love that book, and I would recommend it in a heartbeat to anyone. And Eyes in Front When Running by Willow Kane. That's a fairly new book.
Yeah.
Willow Kane is a hilarious person, and her
She's an actor.
vivaciousness and humor.
She's an actor,
She's
right?
an actress.
Yeah.
Yeah, she is, and she's a playwright. She's amazing. And so this book is it explores this woman who's 30-something, and she's in that time in life when her partner wants to have a child, and there's all kinds of things that come up, and I'm not going to talk about it too much because I live in fear of giving too much away. But it is a wonderful book, and again, I love humor in a book, and even though most of these books are really deep and heartbreaking, they're also quite funny. Except The Retreat, which is not funny, it's terrifying, but it's also really well done. That's by Elizabeth de Mariaffi, and it explores this group of people, told through the point of view of an ex-ballerina named Maeve who goes to this retreat, and there's a bunch of people there that know each other, but none of them know her, and there's an avalanche, and they all get trapped, and there's a murder, and she's a beautiful writer, as are all of these people, and so I don't love being terrified usually, but it's so well done, I couldn't help myself. I had to read it. In fact, I've read all of her books and been terrified every time. So don't read them when you're going to bed. The Love Olympics by Claire Wilkshire is another beautiful book. It's a collection of short stories, and it explores love from all angles. The push, the pull, the agony of it, the awkwardness of it, and relationships from teenage girls to women to love relationships of all kinds. It's a wonderful book.
Beautiful sentences.
Beautiful sentences. Yeah. Claire is an exquisite writer. And then one of these books is not like the others.
That's right.
Fossilized by Angela Carter. It is a book that looks at the oil industry in Canada, particularly I forget what she calls them, the petro provinces, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland. And it has a very honest and clear description of what the fossil fuel industry means to these provinces and how environmental laws have been relaxed and governments have sort of formed themselves around the promotion of the fossil fuel industry, and how it's not only not serving the planet right now, but how it's setting us up for failure in the future. And one of the really interesting things about it, particularly with reference to Newfoundland, all of Canada, is that the fossil fuel industry is heavily subsidized by the federal government. So that kind of cripples other industries from being funded and other research from happening, because all this money is being funneled towards an industry that is, on its last legs, when that money should really be diverted to creating a future. Yeah.
And Dr. Carter's a new professor at mine.
Yes, I'm a bit of a fangirl. I've never actually met her, but I was very excited to hear that she's back here. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And Shelly, your 5 picks?
Yeah, well, I almost had come down tortoise actually, so I'm glad you have that one up there. But yeah, I need my books to come up. I don't have a list. Oh, there we are. Yeah, so Michael Crummey's Sweetland is the first one there on the board. And Crummey's here, so no pressure at all. But I actually picked these books when I got that email saying to send 5 Newfoundland books that I would recommend everyone to read. And I really just picked them off the top of my head and sent it back. And it was only later when I started to wonder, like, oh, now what am I going to say about these books during the interview? And it was only then that I realized how much they have in common. And so I think all of them deal with isolation in some way. There's some form of trauma, whether it's like an individual experience of trauma or if it's trauma in the land or both. So I think they are kind of connected. But Michael Crummey's book, Sweetland, I picked that one. That's one I go back to quite a bit, actually, because of the isolation that's captured. And I think I think what appeals to me in that one is the innocence that's in it. There's this kind of naivety and innocence that feels very specific to Newfoundland to me. Like, it would be very hard to call the character Sweetland an ignorant person. I feel like that would be an impossible label to give this man, but he is very innocent and very naive and very tied to his home, enough so that he fakes his own death to stay there. And I don't want to give too much away if anyone hasn't read any of these books. And Donna Morrissey's Kitslaw, when I read that, I think it had only first come out, and at the time I hadn't been reading much by Newfoundland writers, so that was one of the first books I would have picked up and read, written by a Newfoundlander. And I remember reading it and just feeling completely stunned. Because it was so stark and so raw, and as a coming-of-age story that takes place in this tiny outport community in the middle of nowhere. There's no roads or phones or TV, and it's just so harsh. And I remember reading it and thinking, not just being shocked that someone wrote it, but feeling shocked that people want to read this. And I was loving reading it. And so I think that opened my eyes a little to a different kind of Newfoundland, maybe, or just a different kind of, just a different way of, I guess, sharing stories about Newfoundland. Anyway, so I really love that book. Scratching River by Michelle Porter is one I've read a little more recently, just this summer, actually. And it's just phenomenal because, and I've already talked about it, but it just weaves together, this sense of memoir. And I mean, there's a voice of a river in this book, so it weaves together the land with the people, and there's almost this shared trauma, and it's written in these just tiny little pieces that just weave together. It's really, really beautiful. And it doesn't actually take place in Newfoundland at all, but it's still a gorgeous book. Boom Time by Lindsay Bird. So that's a collection of poetry. And I've included that one because it changed or helped me develop a greater appreciation for poetry. I've never been much of a poet. I did very early on in my undergrad At Grenfell and Corner Brook, I would walk around carrying books of poetry because I just wanted to be that person. And I did read poetry, but I don't think I ever connected with poetry the way one is meant to connect with poetry. And I never really knew why. I didn't understand because I felt like I'm someone who should connect to poetry. And I read this book and connected with it on such a level, and I think it's because it was about work, and it was very physical. So this book takes place mostly, it's in Fort McMurray, and it's her experiences working in the oil fields, oil sands. And yeah, and it just, something clicked, and it worked for me, and I really got it. And I've read a whole lot of poetry since, and I'm always reaching out to Lindsay. I'm like, do you have any more of that working poetry? It's like,
She is working on a new book.
she is, yes, and I can't wait. And Duke by Sarah Tilley, I read some time ago. And I picked this one mostly because I hear so little about it, and it's just such a phenomenal book, so well written. And again, it's about isolation, and it's based on letters and diaries of Sarah Tilley's great-grandfather or great-great-grandfather, I'm not sure, even though it is fictional. But it takes place in 1905, and she writes as he would have written in that time, so there's no, like the grammar is very minimal, there's no periods, the spaces between, like that full stop is marked by a double space in the text, but you get very used to reading it, and it's a very smooth read, and it's very beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
I would also like, I would also like to say that neither one of us picked a Lisa Moore book, and I know I didn't, because unless you've been living under a rock for the last 30 years, you know that all of her work is incredible. And so, and same with Michael. I didn't pick him either. But yeah, I just wanted to give that a nod because it seems ridiculous.
Oh,
that
there's so many. It was really hard
Yeah.
to pick 5, actually. And I was like, well, I could pick 1 or 2, or, or 20.
Yeah.
It was hard to pick 5.
You're not saying these are the only books.
No, certainly not.
Just the 5 that are top of mind.
Yeah.
So I'm going to open up the floor to questions now. I'm sure people have questions about how to stop a leopard seal, for example, which is really interesting. Yes, in the back. Wait, now we're going to have a mic.
Thank you. My name is Evelyn. I am a really privileged person. Holly, I was with you in the boat going around Baccalieu Island. My grandfather fished on the Baccalieu, so I was really happy to read that. And Shelly, I'm from Corner Brook. Hi. We may know some people in common. We'll have to chat after.
We might too, Evelyn.
Yeah, we might too, yeah. And as I was reading your book and then telling some people about it, one of the comments I made was, I think this book is partially about how Laurel has not had the opportunity to grieve for her father, and Maxine as well, to grieve for her husband. And maybe you could comment on that.
Yeah, no, I think
Thank you.
Am I on? Yeah, I think that's a big part of the undercurrent in that book that pulls it along, and that's what sends, that's what kind of creates this wall around everyone in the story. And it's only at the end, and it took me so long to come to that ending, but I knew someone had to die or be in a situation where death was inevitable. And so Gran Keen shows up, and that's why she shows up, because she is this opportunity again to grieve together. And that led to the scene in the hospital where all the troops kind of show up after Laurel makes that phone call, and they're sitting around the waiting room in the hospital, and that's when they finally start talking. So I really appreciate that question, because that's exactly what that scene was about. It was about them. They're in a hospital, which kind of echoes the earlier scene in the book, and a family member is dying, and it's a family member that they have not been close with, but it's enough, and they, they open up and they start talking, and they start talking about a bear and a bear being shot, but that's not really what they're talking about, and it's really just the beginning of, getting a little closer. So,
Great question. Any other questions from the audience? Do you want to talk about how to stop,
Oh, well, this is, it's actually
just
fur
in case
seals.
you find yourself?
Well, fur seals, which can walk on their
it's
feet
fur
and come
seals.
running, right, which leopard seals can't actually.
They can't run.
They can't run, no. You don't want to be in the water with them, but even penguins will walk very close to leopard seals when they're on land, because you can't get me here. That's exactly what they're saying. But with fur seals, so we landed, this was on South Georgia, which I was just talking about, and life has recovered incredibly since the old whaling and sealing days, when seals were extirpated from the island, like just removed. So there's lots of room for recovery on our planet if we give it half a chance. But anyway, so the beach was covered in fur seals, and so on these expedition trips, the expedition team, the resource team, goes onshore first to sort of make paths for people and keep them out of trouble and
To bring
away
the stretcher onto the
and
land.
to bring the stretcher onto the island and
Just in
all the
case.
resources. Yeah. And so, and like big male fur seals are quite large and heavy and mobile and aggressive, and they're protecting their harems. And so they think, you take your stick, and if one starts charging at you, you just lay your stick down on the ground in front of you. I'm like, what? That's how you stop them in their tracks. So it's like, so I guess we'll give this a whirl, will we? Like, am I going to take your word for that? And
you need a
so
backup
I was
stick.
walking along, and there was, I had 6 people behind me, and I was like, yeah, you just, stay with me, we'll be good. And we're walking, and this male fur seal goes, because they have this whole verbal thing going too, this grunting and this barreling and these big yellow fangs. And it was coming right at us, and I put my walking stick, just a regular walking stick, on the ground in front of me, and it stopped in its tracks. It just, and I was like, wow, that works. Whew. I had no idea if it was going to work until that moment. Yeah. Well, so that's good. It's good that works, because I didn't have a plan B.
If only that worked on people. Just thunder.
Yeah. Well, can I say about your book, and I won't give anything away, and if I start to go too far down a road, just say, meh, and I'll stop talking. But I really appreciate it. There's so much trauma in your book, and it's so difficult in a lot of ways. But there are certain things that you didn't allow happen to Laurel. And I'm not going to say more than that, because there are places where things could have gotten a lot worse, and there are places where things could have gotten a lot better too, so I'm not really giving anything away. But I really appreciated that you spared her some of the tragedies that could have been barreling toward her. Mm-hmm. So I appreciated that. Yeah, it wasn't like candy coating, but it was, sparing some of her humanity in important ways.
I appreciate that, actually, and it was hard to find that line.
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah.
and it definitely took a lot of playing around. And I think there were earlier drafts where maybe more happened
Right.
to her, and then follow-up drafts to that where too little happened, and maybe I took it too easy, and then so eventually I found that what I thought worked, but I mean, you never know. You know, I thought it was working.
Yeah.
And I was like, I think this is the line. I think this is the path I want to be on for this, that kind of rides between, honesty and and I just telling it like it is and being real, and then just being delicate and respectful too. You know, like not just to the character, but to the reader and even to me. And yeah, so it was hard to feel that out. But once you get there, once you find that, not so much the path, once you find the direction, it got a lot easier. You know.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you for
Oh,
that.
yeah, I think you did a great job of that.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the audience or from online? Now's the time, not to put anyone on the spot. Did you just put up your hand or did you scratch your nose?
God,
Scratch-
no.
Okay. Shelly's joined here today by, I'll get to you in a second, by a bunch of her fellow employees.
This is lovely. Yes, so I'm an alumni of MUN, but I also worked there for years, and I had no idea these people were showing up. So these are my former colleagues from my time at MUN as an administrator. So deadly administration at MUN, I gotta say. Excellent staff.
Go ahead, Carolyn. Oh, there's a mic.
Hi, I'm Carolyn. Before this session began, Holly, you were describing that trip to Antarctica and the presentation you gave to that captive audience. And you mentioned at the end of our conversation that there was a specific change that one of those passengers took away with them.
Yes. So as I was saying to Carolyn and Gloria, you know, that I've been walking this decision tightrope about whether I should be in Antarctica or not. And so when I gave this presentation on plastics, there was a British soap maker who was on the ship, and he said he was not going to use plastic packaging for his products anymore after that. So so that was a win,
Yeah.
you know, an environmental win. But you know, but still, as I was saying to Carolyn and Gloria, it was like, so his carbon footprint and the ecological damage that he's saving the planet from with this change, how does that compare to my own carbon footprint and my rubber glove flying off into the, you know, being in Antarctica? So it's really a difficult balance, but I've come down.
You know, the carbon footprint idea has been promoted by industry to make us feel guilty.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And that's why we have to hold governments and industry accountable. But I still feel like, I compared it, someone said, like, what difference is, you know, your plastic making? And I said, well, there are 8 billion of us, for one thing. So if each person makes a difference, and you know, you're basically, you know, you're talking with your wallet as well if you're refusing to buy plastic and investing in things that are
I'd love
ethical.
to go to the grocery store with you and see if you
Yeah.
can buy groceries
Let's all go to the supermarket after here.
without using plastic. 'Cause
Yeah,
it's
it's
crazy.
a challenge, but Michael and I have gotten pretty good at it. You know, it means not eating cherries and grapes. Those are the two things that I miss the most in the world, because I cannot find them in Newfoundland without plastic. But yeah, but the other point that sort of drove the whole thing home for me was an article in the Guardian. I had just finished negotiating a contract for this winter to work in Antarctica, and the very next day I saw an article in the Guardian talking about the impact of tourism on Antarctica, and that one person visiting Antarctica as a tourist has the same carbon footprint as somebody from India for an entire year. So I thought, okay, I'm officially out.
So you're not going this winter? Or this
I'm
is
not
the
going.
last-
No,
you're not gonna go?
yeah. I mean, that's where I have arrived. But now I have other marine scientists saying to me, well, you know, the people that are in Antarctica are the oil people and the people with influence that can actually make change. So I'm kind of, right now, that's where I'm at with it. Yeah.
Any other questions from the audience? Thank you, everyone, for coming to Coastlines and Coffee. I'm sure you have lots of questions that you'll ask privately, and not to the whole group. It was great to have you here, and please buy the books. And thanks very much. I should say thanks to the committee, too. I'm sure there's notes I'm supposed to say. Oh, yes, we're supposed to announce the next Coastlines person, aren't we? Oh, yeah, right. Okay, so traditionally during these Coastlines events, we always announce the next book. And before we finish up, we're going to do that. So it's my pleasure to announce that the Coastline selection for January and February is Soft Serve, a collection of stories by Allison Graves. And if you haven't picked up this book, pick it up for Christmas. It is really great. Here's a quote from Atlantic Books today. I gobbled up all 19 stories like they were melting ice cream, and how can you resist when the engine turns on the first sentence in every story? When my mother told me I was gay, she threw an egg at me. Or when I told my mother I was gay, she threw an egg at me. The week Princess Diana died, my brother Neil got a parrot. Those are just some of the examples of first sentences in Allison Graves' hilarious collection of short stories. So we'll have an event in March, in February and January with Allison, and we'll keep you up to date on the Facebook page. And thank you very much for coming.
Awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.